Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Rosie, are we ready to begin the meeting? It's 9 a.m.
Yes, Madam President, we are ready.
Okay, so it's 9 a.m. and I call the January 10th, 2025 meeting of the SDCERS Board of Administration to order. Rosie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam President, we do have a quorum with the following members absent: Mr. Clifford Shearson and Mr. Louis Gwynn.
Great. So moving on to Section 3, public comment. Do we have any public comments?
No, Madam President, we don't have any public comment for today's meeting.
Okay, so moving on to Section 4, approval of the consent agenda. We have service retirements, drop entries, drop retirements, training, and a board agenda calendar. Before I call the motion of approval for the consent items, is there any member of the board that would like to move one of those items for discussion? No? Okay, hearing none, no request to pull. Can I please have a motion for approval and a second? Are there any members of the board that have any comments? No? Okay, well, let's vote.
And just for the record, if I may, Madam President, it was moved by Thomas Battaglia, seconded by Paul Kaufman, and invite you all to vote.
Awesome.
And with all votes in, Madam President, this motion passes 10-0.
Thank you, Rosie. So we have moving on to business operations, we have 3 informational items this morning, starting with our first information item, where we are going to hear from the financial update presentation from the City of San Diego, the City of the San Diego Port, and the San Diego Regional Airport. And thank you all for coming. So I'll turn it over to Greg to make introductions.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be able to introduce our 3 planned sponsors this morning. And to start, we're going to start with the airport. So it is my pleasure to introduce Scott Brickner, who serves as the San Diego County Regional Airports Authority Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. Scott leads its accounting, capital financial planning, airlines relations, finance, risk management, information technology, and procurement functions. Thanks for joining us today, Scott.
Good morning. Good to be here again. This is, I think, my 4th time coming to present, so I decided you're getting tired of seeing me, and I brought one of my superstar finance directors, Maya Dan. She is our Capital Finance and Airlines Relation Director, and she'll be presenting most of the presentation. I'll follow up with some comments at the end.
Okay. Good morning. Good being here, and thank you for inviting us. As Scott said, I'm a finance person going to talk a bit about the construction aspect of things, so bear with me. I'm not as good as it, but we'll try. So we're going to talk first about the biggest project we currently have, the new Terminal 1. This is the map that kind of outlines the new terminal in blue. You can see the new terminal kind of overlaps the existing Terminal 1 that is here with us for a while. It was built in 1967, so it's really time to go. The new terminal will essentially have 30 gates, and the phase 1 will have 19 gates, and then we'll demolish the existing terminal and construct the additional 11 gates. The other components of the program, you have the airside improvements in red, kind of here, if I can point. And this is really exciting for us because we are building a new taxiway in this project that will allow us more efficient aircraft movement, and it will really make these things more efficient for us as we are a single runway. Our admin building here on the side, in yellow, we already moved to that building in October of 2023. Really great facility. And another component here in purple, the future transit station that we are kind of preserving and dedicated space outside the terminal to provide the future direct connection to the region's public transit network when the region will be ready with the solution. So that's overall the program. Kind of talk about some milestones. So we started the construction in November of 21. We moved to our new admin building, as I said, in October of 23. We opened a new stage 1 of the parking plaza. with 2,800 spaces in August of 24. It's doing well. It's kind of a new facility in front of the existing terminal, allows more parking for our passengers. We kind of lacked of that in the last couple of years. And then in the summer of 25, we'll open the stage 2 with additional 2,400 spaces. And then we get to the kind of, not the finale, but the first kind of exciting part of this project. The first 19 gates will be open in late summer of 25 with the new roadway. And then after that, as I said, we'll demolish the existing terminal. And in the early of 28, we'll build the second phase of the project with the final 11 gates. So very exciting, takes a lot of effort and time on our part, but a very exciting project. I want to show you some pictures. We'll do it kind of really quick, but you can see in the corner here kind of the renderings and the end result, how it will look like. And here where we are pretty much right now, those pictures are pretty recent. So you can see that the sky bridge is here and we're kind of getting there. The baggage claim, again, you can see here in the corner how it will look and where we are right now. This is where, passengers will collect their luggage. The ticketing hall, again, high ceilings, very grand, very different from the existing Terminal 1 if you visited there, for sure. The terminal concourse and the security checkpoint. And this is kind of the highlight of the program. We really are pleased with that. This is a new T1 dining terrace. It will be outside. It will have a view to the downtown Coronado Bridge, the apron with Southwest gates there, and with the aircrafts. Really exciting feature. We don't have anything like that today, so really excited about that. And this is the parking plaza. Again, as I said, stage 1 is open, but it will be a 5-story facility with a lot of additional parking added to our inventory. To talk about some other stuff, we're very excited this year about our air service. We actually worked about 10 years now, or maybe even more, to get a direct flight to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, the DCA. That's a slot-controlled airport, and it's controlled by the FAA. Finally, this year, Alaska announced, and they will offer the flights there. We got a slot, so starting March 17, we have a direct flight to DCA, which is very exciting for us. Breeze started last year in 24 with 5 nonstop new destinations in our airport. We have in May 8 starting KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines will start flying to Amsterdam, so it's another international flight for us. And Porter Airlines, this is a Canadian airline, they started on December 10th a flight to Toronto. Let's talk about our airport business and how airports operate. So first of all, not everybody knows, but airports are self-sustained. We don't get any tax revenue. We are funded through the user fees. We are competitive. Customers have choices. Airlines have choices. Passengers have choices. We have other airports around us, and people decide where, passengers decide where they want a flight from, and the airlines look at the cost and decide where to add the flights. So we are competitive. We are public-private partnership. We're working with airlines, rental cars, concessions, and other entities to create the customer experience. We're very capital intensive. We're called construction site with a runway. I am at the airport for about 15 years now, I think, and every time we say, oh, this is our final project, there is always another project coming up and something else that we need to build. So definitely very capital intensive, and we are highly regulated. A lot of FAA rules, TSA rules, customer border protection regulations, so we need to follow them and make sure that we are operating accordingly. One very important thing is that we have a federal policy on airport revenue diversion, which means essentially that we cannot use our airport revenue on anything besides the aeronautical and airport purposes. So everything, all our revenues, we need to reinvest back into the airport. We cannot divert it for any non-airport purposes, as I said, and we cannot lease any properties below market value to anybody. How our business cycle works, so airlines look at underlying market conditions on demand, on how much it costs them to operate at the airport. Passengers look at the schedules, that the airlines are offering here, how much it costs, the hassle factor of, how easy it is to go through our terminal as our airport. And then when they come here, we generate revenue out of the sales, right? We sell, they park, the passengers park here, rent a car. Airlines, through airlines, we recover our costs, and then we take that revenue and we reinvest it back into the facility and services and to stay competitive. So to talk a bit about our numbers, our 25 revenue budget is $684 million. So you can see in this bar chart we have the operating revenue that consists of airline revenue, which is $244 million. And that's important to say, this is cost recovery. So we recover our operating and our capital expenses with the airlines based on our agreement with them. We have the airline operating and lease agreement that kind of talks about how we recover those costs. And then the other portion is non-airline revenue, which is really the revenue that we drive from concessions, from parking, rental cars, ground transportation modes, and so on. And then the other portion of 34.8% is non-operating revenue that we'll talk about what that is in the next slides. So to give you some flavor again on the non-airline revenue, operating budget is $202 million, and you can see 31.2% of that is parking revenue, right? So getting more spaces with the new parking plaza, we're hoping to increase that and that share. The second biggest one is the rental car license fees, and this is the revenue we get from the rental cars when they rent a car at our rental car center. And then you have next the terminal concessions, and those are all the stores you see in the terminals when you walk in. The non-operating revenue, the majority of it is the interest income. Those are our investments. That's 37.5% of that. You have the facility charges, the passenger facility charges. That's the fee you see on your ticket when you buy it, right? Those fees are collected by the airlines, and they're sending it to us, so we can again use them for our terminal projects. And then we have CFC's customer facility charges. That those are rental cars are collecting from the passengers that are renting the car, and again it goes to us, and we use actually most of it to pay for the debt for the rental car that we issued and the bus operations. And then we also have here the capital grants that we get from the FAA and the QHP. That's the Quieter Home program we have. The expenses, we have $469 million budgeted expenses for 2025. You can see that 36% are non-personnel expenses, 13% personnel expenses, and non-operating expenses 51%. And non-operating expenses, those are primarily the interest expense that we have for the debt that we issued, the debt service, and the QHP program, the Quieter Home program. That's essentially when we insulating the houses and doing the windows and making sure it's quiet, kind of quieter, I will say. The operating expenses, just to again show you some categories here, you can see the biggest one is contractual services. The major expense there is really the shuttles. The shuttles we run for the rental car center, for the inter-terminal, so within the terminal, and the employee parking. Then we have the safety and security category of 17.5%, primarily harbor police. Expenses, guard services, and firefighters going into that category, and the personnel expenses of 27.7%, and this is our salaries and benefits of the employees. We have budgeted about 471 employees, I want to say. So we are definitely growing with the new terminal here as well. And to talk about our capital program, we currently have a budget of total of almost $4.3 billion. The majority of that, you can see, it's 3.8 for the new T1. That's the program we talked about. And then we have ongoing capital improvement program of $430 million. And you can see the funding, how we fund this. The majority of the funding comes from the revenue bonds, 78.4%. So those are the bonds that we issue. And then we use some of our cash and the FAA grants that we get. And I think Scott is going to summarize.
So this is just a summary of the last 10 years of our trend and growth in net position. Our FY24 number is a little misleading. It's $268 million. About $182 million of that was capital grants and non-operating. So we actually had operating income of about $85 million. So still a very solid year. We did have record passenger numbers in '24, so it was the first time since pre-COVID that we finally exceeded that prior high number. This fiscal year, we are doing well. We have a couple of challenging areas in revenue. One is parking. We had no parking in front of T1, new T1 for so long, and we were telling customers, find other ways to get to the airport and all that, and they actually listened. So now we're actually trying to get the word out, and you could help us. We'd be very grateful to let everybody know that we do have plenty of parking in front of T1, as we have half the garage open, as Maya talked about. The other thing, the DCA flight, it's been 20 years in the making, and I don't know if you know anything about slot-constrained airports, but there's basically no ability for us to put a flight in there until the FAA helped us open up 5 slots, or legislation did, I guess. So it was just, our route service development guru and chief revenue officer now, Hampton Brown, has been working for 20 years, no lie, 20 years on trying to get this flight. So that was a big, big win for us. So that concludes our presentation. Happy to entertain any questions.
Actually, I do have a question just out of curiosity. I know with the advent of Ubers and Lyfts, do you see or anticipate fewer rental car usage?
That's actually the second revenue area that we're down this year, and it's been really fascinating watching what's happened with rental cars with the business through COVID. So, everybody was renting cars during COVID because they didn't want to be next to anybody. But then when, and you saw the prices just skyrocket. And now I think the rental cars companies are kind of struggling with the pricing of it, and they've brought down their prices. It doesn't seem like it a lot of times when you rent a car, but they have brought down their prices a bit. And transactions seem to be somewhat on target, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting in the future when you talk about anything like autonomous cars, or they're talking about flying taxis and all of that. And so we really do need to think very forward in terms of our revenue sources and how we make sure that we're still generating the fees that help us provide a great customer experience.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? No?
Yes,
Oh,
just
go
one.
ahead. Mm-hmm.
So, as I've gone down to the airport and driven through where all this construction's going on, I was trying to figure out how the heck are these guys going to build a new Terminal 1 and still have a Terminal 1 there? So do I understand you're keeping the current Terminal 1 running until this wing of the new Terminal 1 is built? Then you move stuff over there, then you knock down the existing Terminal 1 and then build over it? Is that what's happening? Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah, it's and I call it much more than a wing. It's the large bulk of what the new T1 will be. Will open in September because it's the entire head house where the ticketing and security checkpoint and all of that is.
And will it be interconnected to Terminal 2?
Eventually, yes. We're actually on the street right now, request for qualifications on a project to do the connector. That will probably be late 2020s.
Okay. Awesome, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott and Maya, we really appreciate it. Thank you, Scott and Maya. We really appreciate you coming out today and look forward to seeing you next January.
Awesome. Rick, can you introduce our next presenter?
Certainly will. Our next planned sponsor will be the San Diego Port Authority. It is my pleasure to introduce Tracy Largent, who serves as the Port of San Diego's Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm joined today with Tona Martinez, our Deputy Treasurer.
Good morning.
We're going to give a brief overview of the port structure, followed by an overview of the economic impact, financial summary, and then just to highlight two of our big projects. Next slide. The port's responsibilities are outlined in our governing legislation, which is called the Port Act and the Tidelands Trust Doctrine. The legislation mandates the port to manage the bay and tidelands for the benefit of the California citizens, fostering commerce, navigation, recreation, and fisheries while ensuring balanced use of these areas. The Port Act also governs that we are environmental stewards to protect, preserve, and enhance the natural resources of the bay, including plant and animal life and the quality of water within the bay. As a public benefit corporation, the port operates without any tax funding, so we operate solely on the revenue generated from our real estate holdings and the maritime terminal operations. So our port is governed by a seven-member board of commissioners, with each commissioner appointed by their city councils of each of the respective 5 cities. So we've got one commissioner each from the cities of Chula Vista, Coronado, National City, and Imperial Beach, and then 3 from the city of San Diego. This is an overview of our jurisdiction. San Diego Bay has approximately 70 miles of waterfront, and the Port of San Diego is responsible for 34 miles of it. The majority of the remaining waterfront is owned by the Navy, with other federal agencies and surrounding cities holding jurisdiction over some of the areas as well. The 5 member cities that make up our jurisdiction are known as our member cities. So since 1963, the port has invested around $1.9 million into infrastructure around the San Diego Bay. Recent projects that are either underway, starting soon, or are completed include new public parks, roads, and more parts of Chula Vista Bayfront redevelopment, which I'll highlight later. The 10th Avenue Marine Terminal, electrification, modernization, and renovation of the Shelter Island boat launch, which is the most used boat launch in California. Shelter Island and Harbor Island are man-made peninsulas, and the port developed the amenities that thousands of locals and visitors use each year, including parks, fishing piers, promenades, hotels, marinas, and other amenities. So the port has a wide-ranging mission, and these are just 5 highlighted areas of our operations. Port experiences include our tenant restaurants, hotels, marinas, and museums, as well as port parks, art, public spaces, and attractions. Unique opportunities in all 5 of our vibrant cities captivate visitors and ensure everyone feels welcome and connected to the waterfront. The port supports a number of major regional events through sponsorships, for example, the Big Bay Boom, the Wine and Food Festival, Parade of Lights, Holiday Bowl, and many others. The Port of San Diego also champions the safekeeping and environmental care of our diverse ecosystem. Year after year, environmental goals are set and measured to evolve in environmental initiatives, ensuring San Diego Bay remains a vibrant resource and contributes to a remarkable way of life for our visitors and our residents. And then we also have maritime. The Port of San Diego is our gateway to the world, leading our working waterfront and facilitating the movement of goods and people internationally, domestically, including cargo and crews and passengers. And then we do have public safety as well that we cover for our 5 member cities. And then also the Harbor Police Department provides law enforcement services to the airport on a cost recovery basis. You can leave it on that one. The port has a significant economic impact. We actually have an updated economic impact report coming out next week. So we've calculated over a $26 billion contribution to the California economy, up from the $20.9 million that's showed in this slide. And in San Diego County, our economic impact is up to $13.8 billion, which is up from the $9.2 billion shown here. In terms of employment, we support more than 64,000 jobs in the county, which represents about 1 in every 30 jobs. Okay, this graph illustrates the port's revenue over the past 10 years, with the yellow line representing the change in net position during this time. Although revenue saw a significant decline during COVID-19, particularly that was cruise ship revenue and hotel and tourism, we have come back from that specifically in operating. We've just surpassed that in fiscal year 23, and you can see that we maintained that in 24. So fiscal year 24 resulted in an increase of $95 million over fiscal year 23. And I'll note that the port maintains a 6-month operating reserve, which is $84.5 million for fiscal year 25, as well as various other set-aside funds for specific purposes like the Maritime Industrial Impact Fund, the Environmental Fund, and a balanced capital plan where we allocate most, if any, remaining surplus. So when funds are allocated to the balanced plan, they're distributed evenly amongst the member cities. And then those are used for capital projects within that city's Port Tideland property. The port's fiscal year 25 revenue budget is $315 million, with rent accounting for nearly half this total. This includes fixed rent, concession revenue, and storage space rental. The Economic Recovery Program revenue for fiscal year 25 is budgeted at $28 million. The port was awarded $110 million in ERP funding, which has been used for infrastructure improvements, electrification, and projects benefiting all 5 member cities, such as parks, the Imperial Beach Pier, the Chula Vista Hotel and Convention Center, and the Balanced Capital Plan. In addition, the port has most recently been awarded a grant from the EPA for $58 million, which triggered additional local matching grants for $27 million. So these funds will be used for electrification that we had already planned at our marine terminals. Revenue from fees and service charges are budgeted at $49.7 million, consisting of parking, wharfage, dockage, cruise ship fees, citations, and other fees. The service revenue budget is set at $23 million. Additionally, the budget includes $21 million in capital grants this year and $37 million from non-operating investment and other revenue sources. So the port's fiscal year 25 operating budget expense is $234.3 million. So salaries, wages, and benefits make up 56% of the budget, including the port's pension payment, which represents about 10% of the operating budget. The budget for contractual services is $35.4 million, which includes $12 million allocated to LCFS, which is the low carbon fuel standard projects. Community and environmental support is budgeted at $21 million. The capital and policy set-aside budget for 24 isn't included in, or for 25 isn't included in this chart. Okay, now we're going to highlight 2 large projects we have going on. So if you've been down to Chula Vista, I'm sure you've noticed the large construction on the bayfront. The Gaylord Pacific Hotel and Convention Center is a collaboration between the Port of San Diego, the City of Chula Vista, and Rita Chula Vista, LLC, to transform the 535-acre Chula Vista bayfront into a world-class hotel and convention center. And it's really going to be a destination. The project aims to create a vibrant space for people to live, work, and play with new parks, recreation spaces, improved habitats, dining, shopping, and a world-class hotel and convention center. And we've got a video we're going to play. I'm hoping the music doesn't come on so I can keep talking throughout this. This is a drone video we shoot every week or every day. That kind of gives you an aerial view around the... No, try to go back and see if they'll get display. So they'll work on the video. I'll keep talking. The development is a catalyst project, which is expected to spark further growth and development across the bayfront area. It features 1,600 hotel rooms, a convention center with 4 ballrooms and meeting spaces, and event lawns. There's a public promenade with amenities, resort-level features like a pool and lazy river. I've heard something about a really great speakeasy and sports bar as well. And then what this part I think is really great. There's going to be 150 passes sold every day for locals that want to just come in and use the facilities with their family for the day for $10. I just feel like that's very inclusive to our local population.
Technical difficulties, internet.
Oh, well, you can watch this on our video or on our website. Construction began with groundbreaking in July of 2022, and anticipated opening is the summer of 2025, so we're looking at possibly June. When completed, the Gaylord Pacific will be the Gaylord Hotel's first West Coast location, marking a major milestone for the brand. It will have an enormous impact on the South Bay and San Diego region and attract visitors throughout the state of California, the United States, and beyond. And we're told it's already booked 2 years out for conventions that they regularly have at their Gaylord properties. It's creating thousands of jobs during construction alone. Once open, it will create sustained economic impact for $500 million each year with 4,000 direct and indirect permanent jobs. Right. Another project we're working on right now is with the USS Midway Museum. We've teamed up to create the West Coast's largest veterans park called Freedom Park. If you've been down to this area, you'll notice that recently we've brought down the head house, and it's really opened up the view to the water. This project received approvals from the California Coastal Commission and the Board of Port Commissioners, who designated the area as Freedom Park in February of 2024. This will serve as a major cultural and historic landmark, enriching the waterfront and honoring the sacrifices of our military heroes, and will be situated in the North Embarcadero, San Diego's front porch with stunning bay views, which you can already see now with that building gone. It's nearly 10 acres. It's stretching from Navy Pier to the Bob Hope Memorial. The park will offer a wide range of amenities, including natural gardens, memorials, play structures, seating, shading, and interpretive signage. It'll really be a complement for other developments in the area like Lane Field, Portside Pier, and the iconic public art that's in the region. So this was a great collaboration with the Port, the Midway, and the California Coastal Commission. It's estimated at a $65 million cost, with the Port contributing $11.7 million for structural improvements and the Midway funding demolition and full park build-out. So ongoing maintenance costs will be shared between the Port and the Midway, but I think it's going to be a really great investment for the area. The construction began this past spring. I think they just finished the demolition a couple weeks ago of the head house, and then it's planned to be open in 2028. And it's just a great honor to the region's military and history, and I think it's a good complement to the museum right there. These projects really are a catalyst for the local development. Last month, we just had the Coronado Lowe's approve a redevelopment project for $220 million, because they really feel like they want to be on par with some of these other things that are happening in the region, and they feel that both the Gaylord and Lowe's feel that there'll be a spillover destination for when the convention center and hotel open. So that is a positive for our region, and that completes our presentation today. We'll welcome any questions.
Are there any questions from the board?
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, does the Port do future forecasting for their budget? What do the upcoming years look like?
So we're working on a 5-year forecast update right now with the budget cycle. So we do see the next 2 years being fairly flat with our revenues. We are working on some investment in our cruise ship terminals, including dredging and building them out, because we really do see 5 years out with the cruise ships growing. We need a bigger facility to have them docked here in San Diego. But we are looking at that and hoping to find the funds to reinvest so we don't lose out on those opportunities.
Do you anticipate competition with the convention center, with the city, with this new convention center, or will there be a collaboration?
We really don't. The Gaylord has kind of their own set list of clientele already that they use at their other Gaylord properties, and those ones that are booked 2 years out really aren't the ones that you would have at the San Diego Convention Center, because it is a different size. It's a different kind of client.
Okay, awesome.
That we've heard that concern, but we do think it's actually going to help them.
Great. Are there any other questions? No, I know congratulations are in order, Tracy. I know last year you were only here for a few days.
Yes.
So this is your 1 year anniversary,
Thank
so
you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
You made it.
All right, well, thank you, Tracy and Tona. We appreciate you. It is my pleasure to introduce the City of San Diego's Chief Financial Officer, Matt Vespi. Matt leads its Treasury, Compliance, Finance, Human Resources, Information Technology, Performance and Analytics, and Risk Management functions. Joining Matt today is Rolando Charvel, who serves as the city's finance director and city comptroller, with responsibilities to serve as an internal fiscal consultant to the city. And he has a multitude of responsibilities, which includes delivering on the very difficult goal of preparing a physically sound, balanced budget.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Greg. Matt Vespi, City's Chief Financial Officer. Rolando Charvel, our Director of Finance and City Comptroller. I'm going to jump right in. So first, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the chance to return to provide an update on our financial forecast. As we've discussed in the past, the city is a full-service municipality. We provide public safety, water, wastewater, neighborhood services, parks, libraries, but also capital infrastructure. The way we account for all of these different services is through fund accounting. We have several different types of fund accounting, types of funds. We've got our general fund, which is really our largest operating fund. That's where we account for police, fire, park and rec, library, currently refuse collection, although we'll talk about how that'll be changing in the coming year. We've got enterprise funds, the two largest of which are water and wastewater. We've got special revenue funds. One of our largest is the Engineering and Capital Projects Fund, and then we've got our Capital Improvement Program. The reason why I share this up front is this really lays out the structure for our presentation. These are the largest segments of our organization for which we allocate our pension payment. And that's really what's going to drive the structure of the presentation that you're going to see today. So we're going to start with the general fund, then we're going to talk about water and wastewater enterprise funds, and then we'll talk about the capital improvement program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rolando to cover the general fund.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here. So the city prepares three reports that are publicly presented to both the council and the public, and these really serve as the foundation for our financial planning. One of them is the general fund 5-year financial outlook. There's also a public utilities financial outlook that includes both the water and wastewater funds, and then we also have a CIP financial outlook. So when we talk about the assumptions used in general terms for these reports, looking at the operating side for general fund and water and sewer, we start with what we call baseline. Baseline meaning what does it take to basically maintain the same levels of service that we currently have projected in our current budget, right, which is FY25. So that's our baseline. Then from there, we do assume some revenue growth for our major revenues for the general fund, as well as rate increases for water and wastewater that are projected. In terms of the expenditure side, on salaries, we have typically been using the assumption that Chiron uses, which was 3.05. It now has increased to 3.25. We shifted from that practice, and now we're using a bit of a more conservative assumption. We use 2.73%, which is the CPI average over the last 15 years. In terms of the pension payment, we use the 2023 valuation. That was the report that was available when we issued the report. Now we know that the pension payment has increased by about $37 million. So the numbers that you see, we'll walk you through what that impact has on our pension payment for some of our funds. And then finally, some of the NPE, our non-personal expenditures, we do apply some inflationary factors. We know that contracts, for example, increase between 2% and 3%. To the extent we know energy, gas and electricity rates are going up, those are factored in as well. Same thing with water and sewer rates. So this table here shows our FY25 budget, and in relation to the pension payment, as Matt mentioned, our pension payment is allocated based on pensionable salaries. You can see here the general fund has the most portion allocated to it, and that's simply because that is the fund that has the most employees, right? That is the fund that pays for police, fire, transportation, parks, libraries, and so that's about 73% of the pension payments allocated to that fund, followed by public utilities. Public utilities has a large capital portion So it doesn't have as big of an impact on public utilities as it has in the general fund. Then you can see the Engineering Capital Project Fund. That is the fund that houses the engineering team that implements our CIP program, and then followed by all the other funds. That's about 10% of the pension payment. You can see that for FY26, the pension payment was estimated at $496 million. Now we know that it's going to be about $37 million more based on the evaluation that you will be hearing today. In terms of diving into the numbers here, so this is the outlook for the general fund. As we said, presented in the last couple of years that we've been here, we were projecting structural shortfalls. That is reflected in this table. As you can see, this again is baseline, meaning just basically maintaining the current levels of service that we currently have projected in FY25 budget. You can see that for FY26, the projected shortfall is about $258 million. That's about 12% of the general fund. In the outer years, you see that number decreasing. That's because revenue growth outpaces expenditure growth based on these projections. The one thing I wanted to make sure we highlight here is that there is a big assumption in terms of our reserve contributions. So for FY26, for example, there's a $63 million reserve contribution based on the city's reserve policy. Most likely, we will not be making that reserve contribution. So that really brings down the deficit to about $195 million. Now, how is this shortfall different from prior years? Like I said before, we've been in front of this board for a couple of years now, and we knew that there is a structural budget deficit for the city. Normally, when we've had recessions in the past, 2003, 2008, normally what happens is the two major revenues in the general fund are immediately impacted: sales tax and transient occupancy tax. And then that's followed by property tax. It's about an 18-month lag for a property tax revenue, just because of the way it's collected by the county. So normally you have a couple of years of lower revenues, but then those revenues bounce back. We typically make reductions, but then those reductions can be restored. What we've seen over the last 5 years, really since the pandemic, is that the cost of running the city have really outpaced our revenue growth. You have seen the increasing need on the homelessness front to address that problem. That's for FY26, we're projecting to be north of $100 million to address that issue. Employee compensation, that has been a significant issue for the city. With Prop B freezing salaries for such a long time, it got to a point where we really couldn't hire employees because we were not competitive compared to other jurisdictions in the region. And even if we did hire them, we would lose them after 12 months. So that had to be addressed. So we did make some adjustments to compensation in order to become more competitive. On the pension front, because of Proposition B being overturned, that had an impact on our pension payment, as well as some changes on the assumptions that you're well aware of, as well as some of our salary increases exceeding the assumptions used by SDCERS actuary. On the non-discretionary expenditure side, when you look at things like insurance, liability claims, just the normal cost of running the city, those have really increased very significantly. There are also unfunded mandates in the form of organics recycling, for example, stormwater. Those are very significant costs that really haven't come with a corresponding revenue increase. And our infrastructure, as it continues to age, the need to continue to invest in our infrastructure continues to grow. Now, we have taken steps to try to address some of these shortfalls. As you know, we requested that the pension amortization be reset to 15 years or 20 years. That was considered by the board last year. In addition to that, we also put a measure, sales tax measure, in the ballot that would have doubled our sales tax revenue by about $400 million. Unfortunately, that was not successful. So now we are here and we need to address this shortfall through other mitigations that I'll cover in the next couple of slides, as well as budget reductions. So here you see, again, the baseline expenditures. In addition to that, that was basically maintaining, like I said, current service levels. When you look at new facilities are going to open, those need to be staffed as well as we need to purchase equipment for those. There are what we consider planned commitments, and those are areas that both the mayor and the council will need to evaluate as we go through our budget process. Probably the most significant area there is that relates to homelessness. We know that we need probably an additional 1,000 beds for homelessness, so that accounts for a large portion of that $61 million that you see in the slide there. So when you include those new facilities and planned commitments, the shortfall grows to about $329 million for FY25. If you back out the reserve contribution that I mentioned, that is really up to the city's discretion whether to make it or not, that brings the deficit down to about $266 million. Now, in terms of mitigations, options to address the projected shortfall, we do have about $20 million where we had budgetary savings last year. Those are available to potentially address some of this deficit. The mayor issued a directive to establish a hiring freeze as well as eliminate any non-essential spending. We're hopeful that will generate additional budgetary savings that can be applied to FY26. Suspending the reserve contribution, like I mentioned, that's about $63 million. Probably the most significant mitigation option that we have is implementing a trash collection fee. That will probably generate between $60 and $70 million. We did pass a TOT increase measure several years ago that has been in litigation. We are hopeful that will be resolved towards the end of this fiscal year. That would generate between $35 and $40 million for homelessness expenditures. And really anything that we are not able to address through these mitigations would need to be addressed through budget reductions. We believe that with these mitigations, if all of them are successful, we can probably bring down the deficit to about half of what was presented in the baseline. And just to give you some context here, the deficit of about $258 million, that's the baseline at 12%. We could if we translate that into reductions on the personnel side, proportional between personnel and non-personnel, that would equate on an average, using average salaries, of about close to 1,500 positions. Again, like I said, if these measures are successful, we can probably bring down to half. And we'll continue to, over the next several months, we'll continue to try to identify other mitigation actions to bring that shortfall down even further. With that, I'll hand it over to Matt.
Thanks. Thanks, Rolando. So from that covers the general fund. From there, we move into public utilities and then into capital. And as you saw at the front half of Rolando's presentation, public utilities and capital represent much smaller portions of where we allocate our pension payment. And because of that, I'm going to go through these slides quite a bit quicker than the general fund, as that really is the focus of the presentation and our concerns for the financial standing of our organization. But with that said, public utilities, it is an enterprise fund. We charge rates for providing water and wastewater service to our customers. Our 5-year outlook for public utilities is really driven by developing what our system-wide revenue needs are to provide the water and wastewater service. So it's structurally different from the general fund in that we have the ability on the enterprise side to increase our revenue by a vote of City Council to meet our expenditure needs. So we're really looking at what are our needs to maintain our infrastructure on the water and wastewater side, and then what rates are required to meet our obligations in providing water and wastewater service. We are projecting rate increases throughout the outlook period. That is consistent with pretty much every other water and wastewater agency in the region, and the rate increases are significant, and I'm going to share those in the coming slides. What is the driver of these rate increases? On the water side, largely the cost of purchasing imported water, but also, as Rolando mentioned, non-discretionary cost increases tied to inflation with chemicals and other expenses in operating these systems. But also, we do want to note we've got Pure Water, which is a advanced water purification project coming online, phase 1 in the next couple of years, and then phase 2 further down the path. But expenses with those are driving the need for rate increases, dam repairs and replacement, and then regulatory compliance. On the wastewater side, it's really chemicals, Pure Water, and regulatory compliance. This slide shows what our projected rate increases are for water over the next several years. So first, we start in blue with a little bit of history for what our rate increases were the last couple of years. The first bar that's orange and yellow, rate increase we implemented on January 1st, 8.7%. The orange bar in the middle there is a projected rate increase that we expect to implement on May 1st of 2025. That still needs to be taken up by council, but that rate increase for May is driven solely by the cost of purchasing water. The cost of purchasing water exceeded our expectations for this year, and as a result, we'll be going back to council in the coming months to ask for approval of an additional rate increase for calendar 25 to address the cost of purchasing water. From there forward, these are our current projections for rate increases that would be effective the first of each calendar year of 26 through 30. You can see that in each year, we're currently projecting that those rate increases would be double digits. This slide provides just an overview of all of our projections. Again, our projections for water and wastewater are driven by our expenditure needs, and then we really kind of back into our revenue requirement, and then that really drives what our rate increases are. On the wastewater side, we are also projecting rate increases over the next 5 years, not as high as the water side, but you can see here what those projected rate increases are, and these are projections for, again, effective January 1st of each year, 26 through 2030. Again, this is a pro forma showing the projected expenditures for the wastewater operation, driving what the revenue requirement is. And I won't spend too much time and bore you guys with these numbers. From there, I'm going to shift to the capital improvement program. Probably not surprising, we've talked about this in past years here, but city's got a really large infrastructure portfolio, lots of different assets and lots of different classes, everything from stormwater assets to transportation right-of-way assets, parks, libraries, wastewater, water facilities, and a host of thousands of buildings as well. Our projections in capital, this chart at the top, just a quick summary of our 5-year capital projections. First line in that table shows our projected capital needs. Second line shows the capital funding that we've identified to meet those capital needs. And then the red numbers show the gap, the funding gap that we project for each year from 25 through 29. This report will be refreshed over the next 60 days. That's why these numbers are dated. But it's important to note here that the entirety of the funding gap is a general fund funding gap. The enterprise funds and the non-general fund portions of our capital program are funded by rates. We therefore project that we will have the revenue to meet our capital needs outside of the general fund. That funding gap is nearly 100% general fund. Our largest funding gaps, stormwater, transportation, facilities, all of which are general fund assets. So in conclusion, the ADC continues to represent a significant expenditure for the city each year. You can see we've got structural deficits projected, but I can assure you that we are not a credit risk. We will make our payment each year during the outlook period and each year beyond that. But it's a significant obligation, and it's going to be a tough run for this organization. So, structural deficit for the general fund. We've kind of Rolando covered how we intend to address that. We covered rate increases anticipated for both water and wastewater to meet our operational and capital needs. We've got the ability to finance some of our capital infrastructure on the general fund side, but we can't finance all of that, not with the additional revenue. And really what it comes down to is prioritization and efficiency. Prioritization really translates to reducing our expenditures, prioritizing which services are core to the services that the city provides to its residents. So with that, again, thank you for the time, and we're happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions from the board? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, tough situation for sure. Last year, you told us the same thing. I think you were saying this year that if those new revenue sources don't come in, you're looking at a reduction of 1,500 FTE, right, roughly? And I think that's consistent with what you thought last year. Is that something that you can address without layoffs of existing personnel? Or, I mean, are you moving people around, or how do you figure in that worst case scenario you make that happen?
Thank you for the question. That is just to provide some context. We think that with the mitigations that we identified, especially Measure C, Measure B, the trash fee, and the TOT increase, we probably are going to bring that down to about half. So if we translate that deficit just basically prorated to what our personnel budget is, that would result in that would be about 750 positions. We are hopeful there are other potential mitigations that are still being worked out. For example, there could be parking revenue increases, things like that. We're going to do everything we can to minimize the impact to employees, but there is no doubt that there will be impact to our employees, because for the general fund, about 70% of the expenses are our staff, our employees. So there's really no way to close this large of a gap without impacting employees.
What's your, at what point do you have to, what is the saying, fish or cut bait on that? Or you don't understand the question?
No, I don't understand.
Yeah, I must be too old for this. At what point do you have to really execute on that issue of, hey, 750, what are we going to do here?
I think the way we're approaching this budget shortfall is we really need to go back to having a structurally balanced budget, and that's the priority of the mayor. So what that means is that we can't continue to provide the same levels of service that we have been providing in the past. It's just simply not sustainable. I mean, whether the policymakers, both council and mayor, decide to try to do another attempt at a revenue measure, which I think is necessary not only for the operating side, but I think that really the main concern, I think for both Matt and I, is the infrastructure side. What's happening is the city is getting older, and the infrastructure is getting, because we have been deferring maintenance for such a long time. We're starting to see, for example, stormwater emergency. What we saw last January during the storms, we're starting to see sinkholes. So basically addressing those emergencies are becoming more expensive than simply maintaining the assets. So I think that's really where probably the most important part of addressing this revenue shortfall is.
And just to add to that, another way to look at that is, in order to create space within general fund revenue to fund the capital needs, you need to further reduce your expenditures on day-to-day operations in order to have capacity money to pay for those infrastructure improvements. So that's really where the balance comes, is we can get to balanced as we project here about $200 million. That brings your operations to balanced. It doesn't really provide the additional necessary funding to meet that infrastructure funding gap. And that's really, to Rolando's point, we either reduce our expenses further on a day-to-day basis to fund that capital need, or we need additional revenue to meet the infrastructure needs of the region.
If I could just add one more, just to give it a little bit more context. So the general fund, about 19% is a pension payment. When you add debt service on long-term debt and retiree health care, which are obligations we have to make, that's about 25% of the general fund. And then when you look at public safety, police, fire, lifeguards, that's about another half. So we're talking about that these reductions really need to, it's really going to be difficult to implement reductions on the public safety side. That's just, it's just very hard to do. So that makes it very difficult, because then these budget cuts, which we're saying 12% or 6%, whatever it is, it needs to be applied to a very small portion of the general fund. So that's what makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, and obviously, no one would want to be in your shoes to try to do all this, but Matt, I really admire the fact that you're keeping the infrastructure issue top of mind, because it's one of those things that it degrades incrementally, but at some point it falls apart. And if you don't pay attention to it, you lose way more than you would have with small repairs and so on. But obviously, you're on that. So
unfortunately, we're already there where the infrastructure has degraded.
Yeah.
Right. We're beyond repair.
Yeah.
Another thing we spoke about here in this setting last year was when we look back over time. Our presentation was longer last year. You guys remember that. We were up here for too long. But we talked about how did we get here? We got here because this organization underprojected for what its true personnel expenses are, and underprojected what its infrastructure expenditures are, and really kind of hit the ball on what the revenue needs of this organization are. And unfortunately, Rolando, myself, the current city council, the current mayor are really kind of stuck now with holding the bag for what's occurred over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that really shows in our projections. And we're really just trying to be as transparent as possible about what the needs of the organization are to do it right. And that's what I think you see here in these numbers. It's really unfortunate. One of our main goals is to minimize the impact to staff in all of this. We have a robust process for a reduction in force process, which allows us to find other positions in the organization that are vacant, that are outside of the general fund primarily, so that we don't have employees that actually lose their job, but they will get moved around. They'll get displaced in the organization, which is also impactful. But hopefully that is the outcome. We'll be doing everything we can to minimize those impacts. That's part of the strategy with the hiring freeze, is as regular attrition occurs, that creates other vacancies for landing spots for employees. But all of that is part of kind of our strategy. But as Rolando mentioned in this, we've been projecting for what's coming in fiscal year 26 for several years now. This is not a surprise to any of us. It's unfortunate that, kind of a couple of those big ticket items we tried to do to address this didn't pan out, but thank you for the questions.
So I have a question. I'm curious, given the narrow loss of the measure, is the city council considering another measure? And then also, would you consider issuance of a GO bond on a measure? Then the voters would know specifically, potentially, what their increased taxes are. I know it's a higher threshold for vote, but it might be something to consider.
I think all of those things will be considered. And unfortunately, we've got a 2-year window, or a 2-year kind of process. But one of our council members was pretty clear in their swearing-in ceremony, that they're going to rerun the measure. One of the council members that was key to running the measure in November committed to rerunning that measure. So I think there's definitely an understanding that the need is there. As far as the GO bond goes, the 2/3 requirement, but then also it would really help on the infrastructure side, but we also have a day-to-day funding gap, right? A day-to-day operations gap, which is really the good part of the sales tax measure, is it provides enough funding to address the day-to-day, but also provide that capacity for infrastructure investment, because it creates first it's a cash infusion into the infrastructure program, but then also creates additional borrowing capacity, kind of on the longer term. That's how Rolando and myself, we kind of envision it would work, you know? So I think all things should be on the table, and I would encourage all of you to help us tell that story where you can and show the need that the organization has.
Sure, and then another question, do you have to balance the budget every year? Can you run a loss since you're showing losses? Does it have to be literally balanced?
We are required to balance the budget, propose a balanced budget each year by April 15th. That's a requirement of the mayor in the city charter, and then city council in June annually adopts a balanced budget. You know, the definition of balanced is one that you can get into some details, some weeds on.
Okay.
Is it balanced to use one-time revenue for ongoing expenses? We've done that the last couple of years, and we did that because we had confidence that we were going to make a run at those big ticket items like the sales tax measure and stuff, right? But where we are now, the probability of those things, I think we need to really come to grips with. Those things seem unlikely. We need to get to structurally balanced, and structurally balanced to us means our ongoing revenues meet our ongoing expenses. Any one-time revenues go to one-time expenses, and those should be primarily infrastructure expenses, capital expenses. That's how we're approaching it. It's going to be a high hurdle for this year to get to structurally balanced, but that's the path that the mayor wants to achieve, and that's what we'd like to see as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any other questions? No. Well, thank you and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Rolando. Appreciate you.
Okay, so on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank all of our plan sponsors for joining us today, presenting their financial updates. This was very timely information for our board as we move forward to evaluate the appropriately funding the plans. So our next information item is a presentation of the draft June 30, 2024 actuarial valuation results for the City of San Diego, the port, and the airport. Greg, do you have any other announcements regarding this item? No?
Only to say to welcome Gene Kowarski, Alice Alsberg, and Matt Wells from the Chiron firm. They're our SDCERS consulting actuary, and they're here to present our draft valuation. Thank you, Gene.
So we will, the next slide, provide some background information, and as usual, we'll cover the historical trends and then dig right into the current valuation results, and we end it with our projections. The timing of everything is something we've shown each and every year. This is the June 30th, 2024 valuation that we're presenting in January, and the board gets a couple of extra months to think about what we present here today to finalize and adopt the results. And then that results in the city's ADC being paid as of July 1st, beginning of fiscal year 2026. The next slide just shows all the different planned effective dates, all the different tiers. And you can see now everyone is in black on the city side, the reopening. And there's been less movement when it comes to the Port District and the Airport Authority. As far as historical trends, assets and liabilities, you could see during the roaring 90s, the markets were performing extremely well. The plan was nearly fully funded. And then you had the combination of the dot-com bubble bursting in 2001, 2002, in combination with the city underfunding the MP 1 and 2 crisis. And then there was a recovery up until the Great Recession in 2008, and you see the big dramatic drop down, and steadily increasing funding since then. But it's a little misleading. If you look at 2009 through 2024, you'd say we're just treading water, but not really. What's happened during that period is your discount rate has changed from 8.5% to, not 8.5%, 8% to 6.5%. So you're in a much stronger position today than you were in any period prior to that. As far as the city contributions, the city has always paid its contributions. In fact, sometimes has paid a bit more. And those are the gold bars paid by the city, and the blue bars are what we compute as the ADC. And then there's a pattern of gains and losses. The gold bars are anything above zero is a gain, everything below zero is a loss. You can see the dramatic investment loss of the Great Recession there in the middle. And you had some gains in most other years. But then in the last several years, you've seen liability losses that are bigger than anything you've had previously, and those are primarily attributable to salary increases. The next slide shows over the period since 2008 what contributed to the change in the unfunded liability. The net increase over that period is $2.3 billion. 2.3 billion since 2008. And if you look at the top two colors of that bar chart, those are the strengthening of the economic and demographic assumptions. So if not for changing the assumptions, you almost would have had a slight increase in unfunded liabilities, but it's primarily driven by our strengthening of the assumptions. Alice will talk about the Port District.
Thanks, Gene. Thank you for having us. You'll see a similar pattern for the Port District in terms of the actuarial liability compared to the assets. So the liability being the blue bars, the assets being the lines. The percentages at the top of the bars are the funded ratio of the system. So in the early period of this chart, so in the mid-90s there, the port was over 100% funded. It experienced the same two downturns that the city experienced with that dot-com burst, and then the Great Recession in 2009, where the funded ratio dropped from 92% to the 70s. And since then, with the strengthening of those actual assumptions and the continued growth of the plan, we see that currently the fund is sitting at 78% funded in 2024. In terms of the actuarially determined contribution, the ADC, the port always has paid the full ADC. And we see here that the actually determined contribution in the blue bars matches the contributions that were actually paid by the employer in the gold bars. So that contribution has consistently been paid, maintaining and continuing on a growth pattern of full funding for the system. In terms of investment gains and losses, that 2009 investment loss, the gold bar that dips down, continues to be the most significant experience that the plan experienced. But here in 2024, if we look all the way to the right of the graph, we see that the liability loss was more significant in the most recent year compared to prior years. And that liability loss was driven by salary increases greater than expected. And that amounts to about a 2.7% loss from that salary increase. And when we have a salary increase like that, that does translate into an increase in the actuarially determined contribution, which we'll see in a later slide. Yeah.
Quick question. So it makes it sound like when you say greater than expected, it may be greater than the assumption, because it makes it seem like, oh, we didn't know we were going to do these big salary increases. It's really not accurate, right?
Thank you. Yes, so it's greater than this assumed. When I say expected, I interchange expected and
Okay.
assumed in terms of actuarial terms. But yes, so we have that across the board assumption that salaries will increase at 3.25%, plus we have an additional assumption for merit and promotions that are layered in there. And when the increases go beyond that assumption, then we see this. But the port will know within their organization that yes, they had anticipated these salary increases.
Okay.
Thank you. And then we turn to the factors contributing to the change in unfunded, so that UAL, the unfunded actuarial liability, since 2008 for the port has grown by $150 million. And the sources of change are similar to those of the city, where we have the economic assumptions, the demographic assumptions, leading to an increase in that unfunded, as well as liability experience. And the liability experience is when the actual experience of the plan deviates from the assumed membership behavior, demographic experience.
I'm going to talk briefly on the airport authorities, the same graphs that we've seen for the prior two plan sponsors. As we see, the airport authority following the 2008 financial crisis dropped to 86.9% funded. But the airport authority has made contributions in excess of its ADC since that time. And so instead of dropping down beyond that, we've seen the airport authority maintain a funded ratio in the upper 80s to low 90s since that time. And over the last 4 years, we've seen that approaching 95%. We can see the graph of the contributions on the next slide. We can see in 2010 is when the airport authority really started paying contributions well in excess of the actuarially determined contributions. And since 2017, there's been at least $1 million contribution in accordance with the airport's policy to target 95% funded with those excess contributions. And so in 2024, that excess contribution was about $3 million. Here we have the history of gains and losses since 2003. We can see the magnitude of the bars is relatively smaller compared to the port and the city. And especially in recent liability losses, the loss due to experience for 2024 was just 0.6% of liability. Here we have the factors contributing to UAL changes since 2008. The total has been $23.3 million since 2008, and that's really just tracked as liabilities and expenses have grown at about a 98 to 95% ratio over that time. The biggest factors being those strengthening of the economic and demographic assumptions, and contributions offsetting those increases by about $24 million over the period.
So now we turn to the June 30th, 2024 valuation results. And as we've stated a few times already, the pay increases were greater than what we assumed. The 3.25 is the assumption, and you can see the 4% for the general and the police members and the fire and the lifeguard. And an additional increase in 2025, as I will say later on, that contributed to the majority of the increase in the ADC. We also had a small amount for Proposition B, Phase 3 funding. These are people that were hired after the closure of the plan and then left before the reopening. But some of them were rehired, and the rest of them, or not the rest of them, but many of them became deferred vested members. And that contributed to the fiscal year ADC, but only $0.6 million. On this slide, we're looking at three different things. In the dark blue, membership statistics, and then in the gray, assets and liabilities, and in the gold, the contributions, or the ADC. The biggest thing in the membership area is a projected payroll of 16.3% increase, and that's largely due to the increase in actives of 7.6, which is a little curious that there was an increase in hires, and now we're talking about hiring freeze. And then the average salary increases of 8.1, and that's what contributed to the 16%. Not much else happening with those in pay status. There were moderate increases in the average benefit and total benefits. With respect to the gray area, I think the key numbers here would be the fact that the market value of assets increased more than the actuarial liability, and that resulted in a funding ratio both on a smooth asset basis as well as market basis being improved slightly, 0.4% on a smooth basis, 0.8% on a market value. And then you see the ADC going up from 486 to 533. It's a 9.6% increase. The next slide is going to talk about the factors that led to that. So in this slide, I think the most important numbers would be the two far right columns, what happened to the unfunded liability and what happened to the ADC. So we expected the unfunded, or assumed the unfunded, would decrease by 113, and it actually increased and by 128.9, and it's largely due to that liability experience. You had a small asset gain, you earned more than the 6.5%, but the liability experience, the vast majority of that were salary increases of $267.1 million, and that correspondingly resulted in the $37.2 million increase due to that factor for the ADC. That's how the ADC, we thought the ADC was going to go up anyways to 497, 498, but in fact it's 533, and again, it's the salary increases.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Brad.
So my question on that is, so the MOUs are 3-year MOUs, and so everybody has what the pay increases, the actual ones will be. So I just don't see how the projection, because back when you did the 496 or 486, the projection, or what the payment was, you knew every 6 months this bargaining unit gets X percent, and then the next 6 months this percent. Do you bake that? Was that baked in?
We didn't have all the information that you're discussing. There's a special increases going to certain groups, and we don't have all the information, and we just look at what's happening in the next year.
Okay, but so then there were that many special increases that made up 30+ million. Plus, I know there are the assumption changes that we did as a board. It just seems like a lot.
Right. So when you look at the general across the board salary increases, that's something that we can apply in the actuarial evaluation because we receive that membership data. We know who's a general member, who's a police, fire, lifeguard, and those across the board increases are applied. The special salary adjustments, which in the first and second year of the MOU were quite significant for really nuanced groups, but here and there picked up quite a bit of people, quite a bit of the employees received those adjustments, but those adjustments are not something that we applied in the valuation because they're outside of the scope of the data and the information that we have available. So if you look at our valuation from 2 years prior, let's take a look at that row, the fiscal year 2024 liability experience. So in 2024, that liability increased the UAL by $267 million from the salary increases being higher than assumed. In the prior year's valuation, it was closer to $350 million. So the layer of general salary increases, those special salary adjustments. This year, we saw a decrease in that, but knew we had anticipated that that was coming, but we already saw that that was less of a loss than the prior year. So we foresee that same situation occurring with those special salary adjustments for the following valuation and capture what we can through our actuarial assumptions.
Interesting. Thanks for the
We also are
explanation.
going to be doing an experience study in a couple of years, and that's going to be a bit complicated because if we base it on the recent history of these large increases, you would say that we would increase our salary assumption, but then hearing the city's situation with hiring freeze and the like, so it's going to be a difficult decision to be made.
Yeah, I get that you can only deal with information that you have. So I understand. So I just was amazed, and I guess partly part of the increase also be due to the fact that the city did add hundreds of new employees too during that time frame. Does that contribute?
Yes.
And
Yes.
if I may take us back one slide, in the breakdown of the ADC, so the gold section there, the employer normal cost, so that is the cost of active members earning benefit for the given year. Looking even in this 1 year, that cost went up by 13%. And in the prior year, it doubled. So when the plan was still frozen, we were hovering around 75 million, and it jumped to 150 with that normal cost. So as the actives come in with the higher pay, that piece. So it's not simply underfunding. It's not just the unfunded, but it's even the cost on that annual basis.
And that's nearly 20 million increase in that normal cost. So to your point, the 7 points, you go back to that slide, the 7.6% increase in the number of actives directly contributed to that.
Okay. Thank you.
So on the sources of change slide, you were in the right place before.
Wait, oh, sorry.
No, you were exactly.
I was going to the UAL sources
Go
of
to
change.
20.
I apologize. Yes, there we go.
Ah, wow. I think you talk about the investment experience gain, beyond your expectations, right? Or beyond really the discount rate is what it comes down to, right? So it's 6.91%. As opposed to 6.5%. Over what period of time is that?
That's the fiscal year, June 30th, 2020, or July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2024.
Okay. So that's 6.91%.
That's on a smooth basis. On a market value basis, you earned a little over 7.
Okay. All right. So somewhere between 6.91 and 7, something along those lines. So meanwhile, in our annual comprehensive financial report, we're reporting returns during that period of 7.8 or something like that. I can't remember, but anyway, a higher amount over that period, I believe. How come those are different?
Well, I believe, and is Karina here? Yeah.
Give it a go, Gene.
All right. I believe that the financial reports report your return on a time-weighted basis, and we report returns on a dollar-weighted basis, and what you actually earned. The reason financial reports on a time-weighted basis is because investment managers don't have control over your cash flows. So you get different numbers. And this happens with every single pension plan in the country.
Okay. I think I'm going to need a full seminar on that to really understand what you just told me.
I actually, in the middle of publishing a paper on that particular topic.
Oh, well, if
you
you could, yes, that would be stimulating. I would appreciate that. It is, though, I have to say, a little bit hard to grasp where we have essentially from two respected entities get different reports on what our returns on our investment are, and I guess I'm understanding that there is an understandable reason behind it.
You had $1 billion 1 year and you earned 5%, and you had $2 billion the next year and you earned 10%. The time-weighted return would be somewhere in between, 7.5. But on a dollar-weighted basis, you earned that 10% with a much larger asset base, so we'll give you a higher return.
Okay.
Over the period.
And what do we have a long-term return that you report out to us? In other words, you're saying 6.91% over that fiscal year. Yeah. So what is it over 5 or 10 years?
I don't have that at my fingertips here.
6.5.
Well, 6.5 is the assumption. But
well, yeah,
but he's asking what did he?
What's
earn?
the actual?
If I can,
from your perspective. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was going to say to jump in is what we hire Chiron to do is to take a look at in the valuation process is to look at the annual impact. So that's why it's not included in that report because it's not part of the valuation process. But as Gene alluded to, we do an experience study once every 3 years is to make sure our assumptions and methodologies are the best fit for our plan going forward. And that's when you would take a look at those longer trends. And that's where we would try to find what are the trends, where are we overshooting, undershooting with regards to our investment assumption.
Okay, all right. And when does that come up? Is that right after you
Two
retire?
years. No, I love these things. So fortunately, I will get one more under my belt.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So now to take a look at the current year's valuation results for the port. The port did have a new tier of benefits come into effect on January 1st, 2024. And those new tier of benefits fall under the benefit provisions of PEPRA. And they offer a benefit which is more valuable than the prior tier of benefits for those port members. There was a group of port hires that when they're hired at the port, they have to wait 5 years. We called it a 5-year tunnel, but there was a waiting period before they were eligible for membership in SDCERS in the pension plan. Now, as of January 1st, 2024, under that new plan, that waiting period is gone, and so we did see an influx of active members in the port valuation. So taking a look at the membership at the top of this table, we see that the active membership increased by 18.6%. And that increase was hiring as well as no longer having to wait. So the fact that they were previously waiting to enter the system, whereas now they come in directly, we saw this, this bump in the active membership. In terms of average salary, the average salary is increased by 1.2%. However, for the continuing actives, the average salary increased by roughly 13%. So that's greater than assumed. In terms of the actuarial liability, in the gray section there, the actuarial liability increased from $718 million to $757 million, a 5.3% increase, and the actuarial value of assets increased by 4.3%. And that led to the actuarial funded ratio decreasing slightly for the port, where the funded ratio now sits at 78.0%. In terms of the ADC that actually determined contribution, the contribution increased from $21.2 million to $22.8 million for the coming fiscal year. The sources of change follow a similar pattern that we saw for the city, and we'll focus on the right two columns, so the change in the UAL, the change in the unfunded actuarial liability, and the change in the ADC. So the UAL last year sat at $152.8 million, this year at $166.6 million. And the big driver we see in the middle there, the $20.2 million liability experience, that's largely due to salary increases in excess of the assumptions. And that $20.2 million increase in the UAL translates to a $2.4 million increase in the ADC. So the ADC was expected to decrease slightly in the coming year, whereas with that liability experience loss from salaries, the ADC is increasing by $1.5 million to $22.8 million.
And I will go through the results of the 2024 valuation for the Airport Authority. I'm going to start off just by saying that the airport continues to pay contributions in excess of the ADC as a policy to target a funded ratio of 95% or above. Looking at the valuation comparison between 2023 and 2024, the active count increased by 8.5%, and that 395 is the highest number that we've seen. It's fully recovered from decreases that we saw over the last few years. The payroll overall increased by 11%, so that average salary increased by 2.3%, which is near our assumption. Moving down to the assets and liabilities, the actuarial liability increased by 6.3%, which was lower than the increase to the assets, a 7.1% increase on an actuarial basis, a 7.6% increase on a market value basis. So our funding ratios increased by 0.7% on that smooth actuarial basis and by 1.2% on a market value basis. Looking at the last section, we see the employer normal cost is up 3.8%, largely due to that increase in actives. The payment on the unfunded liability due to the increase in the funded ratio is actually down by 7.5% for an overall increase in the ADC of 1.4% over the prior year. Looking at the sources of change, the UAL was projected to decrease by about 2.6 million. That decrease, we had a loss on liability of about 0.6%, similar to the other two plan sponsors. It was largely due to salary, but on a much smaller scale. So the actual decrease in UAL was just under $1 million. The ADC, because of the increased normal cost, actually increased by 85 million. And again, that's because of salary and increased actives, increasing the ADC by 201 million.
So, looking ahead, as you've heard me say often, this projection is not going to happen. I think that's Greg's favorite line. You're not going to earn 6.5%.
You guarantee.
I guarantee. In your valuation report, though, there is you'll see several projections, which I believe when we come back in March, we'll present them as part of the presentation, that shows what your projections look like under various stress testing scenarios. The thing that's, looking at these projections, what's happening here is the reason you see the large drop in the gold bars at the bottom graph, that's because the board has a policy of maintaining a floor for the unfunded liability contribution of $275.5 million, and until the plan is fully funded. So you can see in the top chart, once you're at 100% funded, that's where that gold bar in the bottom graph drops down significantly. But again, you're not going to have 6.5% returns each and every year. And again, we will present a series of stress testing projections that are actually in the draft valuation report that we've sent.
I have a question. So what drivers would cause these numbers to go down, potentially? The investment returns?
Investment return is the largest factor. And, but as I mentioned, that steep drop is due to board policy way out in 2044, 2044. That's the board policy. Until you're fully funded, you're not going to drop your unfunded liability payment below $275 million.
I did have one. It was just a point of clarification, jumping off of Brett's question. Are the general salary increases that the city had scheduled for fiscal year 2026, are those included in the valuation?
They are not.
Okay.
And we intend in March to update a projection that shows what would happen with those increases.
Understood. Thank you.
So meaning, like when we're looking at this, the number for 2027, the 540, that will be much significantly higher
I
based.
don't think it'll be significantly higher, but it'll be higher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the way the projections stand now are based on the assumptions as they stand in the actual valuation. Yeah.
If we had good investment returns, they may not be as high, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Well, anything that exceeds the discount rate over time contributes to an improved situation, yeah?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. The projections for the port show a very steady contribution there in the bottom graph where the gold bars are showing the ADC, so that contribution coming in. In the current fiscal year coming up, so the July 1, 2025 payment of the $22.8 million, and then it drops down to 20.8 and hovers in that range. And that comes about from twofold. There's a couple of amortization bases, and I know we've talked extensively last year about the different bases that make up the UAL payment. So when a couple of those bases fall off, their payment is paid off, that dips down from 2026 to 2027, and then the contribution holds steady with that UAL payment floor until the UAL is fully paid off, the plan becomes 100% funded, and then we continue to see the contribution simply being the annual normal cost and expected administrative expenses.
And looking at the projections for the airport, these projections do not include any excess contributions in excess of the ADC. And so what we're looking at is, on the bottom graph, is just the actuarially determined contribution. The Airport Authority also does not have a UAL payment floor, so what we're seeing is actual unfunded liability amortization. And that's why you kind of see bumps down the road starting in about 2038, is that there are unfunded liability bases that there are gain bases that come off, and so all you're left with is some of these loss bases from changes in assumptions and other losses. So there's a bit of a bump from 2038 to 2048, and then we see a steady increase with the normal cost.
So when we come back in March, again, we will present alternate projections showing some stress testing. In addition, we'll show how SDCERS compares to your peers in the public sector industry. That concludes our presentation.
I just had one. There was, and this is kind of the stock language that was in the different draft reports, and I think it's going to tie into the March presentation. I just wanted to confirm. It says that it's most important to consider the plan's level of conservative in funding the plan and the disciplinability of the plan sponsor to consistently contribute to the ADC. So in SDCERS' case, the plan has been conservative relative to most other public pension funds. It sounds like that's a presentation that's coming in March.
But it's also something I could say here today, yes.
Okay.
You will see what your discount rate is compared to the peers.
Okay.
And we also have a chart that will show what your funded ratio would be compared to your peers if all your peers were using the same 6.5% discount rate.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jean, Alice, and Matt, for your preview of the June 30, 2024 evaluations. We look forward to seeing you soon at our March meeting.
Thank you.
So, our final information item is a discussion on the completion of DROP, and Johnny's going to give that presentation. Do we need a break now, or can we wait until after? Yeah. Okay.
No?
Do you guys want a break now?
Brett's ready to
Okay, we need a break. Thank you. I was going to try to go one more.
Well, that's because you want to bail on us early, that's why. You're trying to drive us through here.
get us started here.
I will, Lisa Marie. Thank you. Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. I presented this information item to the Disability Committee at its November 2024 meeting, and the committee at that time did not take any action, but subsequent to that, a few board members asked that I present at the full meeting today, and I will gladly do that. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue again, because I want to make clear what staff is doing and not doing with regards to people applying for disability retirement and completing drop. This should take about 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll have discussion or any questions afterwards. So this matter gained really attention last fall as a result of a specific disability retirement application in which a disability hearing officer, a retired judge that we hire, that this board hires to help resolve cases and recommendations for disability retirements, said that SDCERS staff was treating those in drop differently than those that aren't in drop. Specifically, the claim was that SDCERS staff believes 100% that if a member completes drop, that they would be ineligible for a disability retirement benefit. I just want to clearly state and unequivocally, Lou, for your recommendation and ask, and for everyone else, that that is not staff's position. That will not be taken in any future disability retirement application. Staff's real position, or our policy in how we look at this, is that the completion of drop is another fact that staff should consider when evaluating whether or not, under the plan documents, a member is eligible for disability retirement, because it answers questions like if they could finish their career by finishing drop, were they being accommodated, a question that we look at. Were they really incapacitated in the fact that they got to finish drop? So that's really my takeaway, but I wanted to share that with you now, but I really want to take a step back and make sure we all understand everything and how drop works and how its interrelationship with disability retirement. Okay, so what is drop? Drop is the Deferred Retirement Option Plan. It's a voluntary program offered to certain members of the port, city, and airport for members who are eligible to service retire. The idea is this person's eligible to service retire. The thought at the time was we want to keep those experienced people. How do we do that? One way of doing that was to offer this program that would lock in your retirement benefit by the time you started drop. You would receive that would-be service retirement in a drop account, and you get to work for up to 5 years, at which time, when you complete it, you're required by the statutes, required by the plans, to exit drop, retire, and then you have access to that drop monies. This lays out some different points of how drop works, but relevant here is the point that when a member exits drop, because they finish that 5 years, they are required by law, by the plans, to quit their job and retire. Okay, so how does this work with disability retirement? Relevant here, one of the elements that this board has to be satisfied with and that the member who is applying has to prove is that their permanent incapacity, their disability, has to render their retirement necessary. So what does the disability retirement plan say about people in drop, and what does drop say about disability retirement? All three plans allow a member who is in drop to apply for disability retirement. Unfortunately, it doesn't say, well, what happens if a member finishes drop? But what we do know under the plan is that if you are in drop and SDCERS grants you a disability retirement benefit, at that time the plans say you must retire, exit drop. So here's the problem, the question at hand. If the plan requires a member to prove that it's their disability, their permanent incapacity, that render their retirement necessary, can they do that when they finish drop and the drop program also requires that you retire and leave the system? Since before I got here in 2010, staff has consistently questioned and challenged whether a member can prove their incapacity renders their retirement necessary if member completed drop. That's questioning and challenging, not just saying, no way, but really looking into it as we do in every case with every different fact scenario. So we don't ignore the fact that someone completed drop because it says things about what elements they're allowed to prove. And our job as staff is to help this board investigate these claims to only give out benefits for which the member is due. Before I got here, there's history on this as well. SDCERS formally informed the city of San Diego of its practices, that someone who is in drop, there's a concern that they're not eligible for disability retirement. And so we have been denying, in some cases, people who've completed drop a disability retirement. The city of San Diego did not challenge that practice at the time. They had the ability, of course, to change the municipal code to avoid this situation if they didn't like that direction. It's the city's plan, and they chose not to do it at that time. So really what staff is recommending is to continue to allow staff to fully investigate these disability applications, but on a case-by-case basis, just as we are doing, to best harmonize how the plan requirements involving drop and disability retirement eligibility. But we're not seeking a bright line rule. In fact, I think we're advocating against saying one or the other, because I think each case can be different, and I want to I'll give you 4 examples of why we're advocating against a bright line rule. Let's talk about Fred. Fred suffers a catastrophic injury that causes immediate employment separation, can't work anymore during the drop period. And it could be a month, days, years within that 5-year period. In such a situation, it's my personal opinion that it's likely that Fred's injury renders his retirement necessary, not his exit from drop. Let's talk about Wilma. Wilma suffers an injury, and her employer provides a temporary position, so they're accommodating her, while she seeks treatment. And then her treatment becomes permanent. All the doctors are agreeing that she is not going to get better at this point, and during which the employer says, well, at this point, we can't accommodate what your permanent incapacity is, your condition, and it ends up that she finishes her drop period. In such a situation, I think it is my personal opinion that it is likely that drop itself wasn't a determinative factor in why she had to leave, that her retirement was rendered necessary because she was permanent at that time. There was the doctors assuming that they couldn't, she couldn't do that job description, and that the city is saying we cannot accommodate you. Let's look at another situation here for a person who completes drop. Here we have George, and George suffers an injury, an employer provides a temporary position, and he's still treating. Now, he's still treating, he may have surgery, may be getting better, we don't know, situations like that, but they finish their drop period. In that situation, I think there's a material dispute as to whether his injury renders retirement necessary, because, well, frankly, he's not permanently incapacitated because he's still treating. So without a doubt, I think drop had something to do with why they're leaving. And if we ignore that fact, then I think we're not looking at the whole picture of, well, why isn't George there anymore? If he was still treating, he was still working, and then can't work anymore. It's part of the question of, in his story, of why George isn't there anymore and whether he's eligible for disability retirement. And our last example is Gracie. She suffers an injury, and they accommodate her. They accommodate her, and I've heard this story in my personal capacity handling these cases where they're great employees, and despite maybe not being able to do the everything that they could do, or sometimes ask, the employer wants to accommodate this person, and they're able to complete drop. And in such a situation, the courts have said if an employer accommodates a person in a permanent position, then they shouldn't be disability retired, because the law favors the employment of those that are injured. And so in such a situation here where a member like Gracie finishes drop but is being accommodated, I think there's a question whether or not she is eligible for disability retirement. So these are just 4 examples of why we think a case-by-case basis approach is better. It's not really drop per se that we look at as a determinative factor, but finishing drop asks other questions of, well, it seems like they're being accommodated if they're injured and they finished. or were they really incapacitated if they could keep doing their job until their career was over. And that is all I have for my presentation. I'll take this again as a information item, so we're not looking for a recommended vote or motion, but I'll take any questions and any discussion.
Just a quick question, and my apologies if I've been asked this several times before, but maybe you can just clarify. Is there what's the financial advantage to a member that accepts, that finishes drop versus enters disability service retirement? Yeah.
Sure, a great question. All three plans say that if you are eligible for a service retirement and also eligible for disability retirement, you'll get the higher of the two. So generally speaking, what I've seen is your service retirement would be higher and your disability retirement would be lower. Because of that, there really isn't a financial advantage in terms of us paying you a dollar amount out. You're eligible for the service retirement, we owe that to you, we'll pay that to you. I think the difference could be personal in that the federal government says that any payment that is compensation for an injury, such as a disability award, would be not taxable to that individual. So a situation where a member received $100,000 in service retirement, but there would be disability was $50,000, that $50,000 would be tax-free, while that additional $50,000 would be taxed.
So there's a potential tax advantage to the employee?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
So the concern I have in this issue is this basic question of should drop retirees be treated differently than service retirees for purposes of disability? That's really a question here. And what I'm understanding Johnny to say is yes, in certain circumstances. The key language here that's being used in these cases is that there are 4 criteria for disability or retirement, and one is whether the injury renders retirement necessary. It's very general language that can be interpreted in a number of different ways. Our duty, from my perspective, and I think what our fiduciary says, is that our duty to our members and beneficiaries has to take precedence over all other duties. It's the members that we're here to take care of. We have an absolute obligation to give the members every benefit that is part of the plan and no more than that. So there's no reason to give a drop person a better deal. There's no reason to give a drop person a poorer deal. When the city moved from Social Security into its own pension plan in the 80s, there was no drop. It was a concept that was created and added in the late 1990s and probably, 2002 it looks like. And what the question was, how would these people be treated compared to regular other employees who were not in the drop program? And so the municipal code says, except as provided in this division, a member who elects to participate in drop has all of the rights, privileges, and benefits and is subject to all the other terms and conditions of active employment as other employees. Additional drop provisions, again from the municipal code, a member who becomes disabled while participating in drop is eligible to apply for disability retirement benefits if this is approved by the board, and then there are time limits that are identical to service retirees. And then under our policy, we say, for purposes of this rule only, active service means the applicant, and this is about disability retirement, is employed by a plan sponsor and actively participates in and contributes to SDCERS, including while an application is an active drop participant. And then it says an application for disability retirement must be made while the applicant is in active service or long-term disability. And remember, drop is considered active service for this these purposes within 4 months of discontinuance of active service or within 2 years of discontinuance of active service. In our documents today, we are actually extending an extension to 2 retirees who have gone more, and I'm not talking about drop here, who have gone more than 2 years and want to go back and file for disability retirement. So in theory, they would have to come back and say, even though they decided to retire whenever it was 2 years ago, a disability existed while they were working that rendered retirement necessary. And as Johnny says, we took this issue, or this issue went before a retired judge who basically said, you are, let me just say, drop participants are being treated differently from other applicants, and explains why. It says, SDCERS has adopted an interpretation of Issue 3, incapacity renders retirement necessary, to be different for drop participants. And Johnny has explained that that is in fact the case, and why an argument can be made to treat them differently. It has inserted the drop deadline as an intervening and superseding cause of retirement in spite of the timely application for disability retirement before drop. So that's what the judge said. My feeling is we have an obligation based on the plan, based on the municipal code, based on simply treating all of our members equally to in fact do that. And that drop participants for purposes of disability, as is outlined in the municipal code and in our own policies, should be treated the same, period. And I'm happy to make a motion. I have a motion that I already gave to Rosie, but maybe people have something they want to discuss.
Well, Johnny, can we take a motion when this item wasn't agenda-sized as
Yes.
an action item?
Yes, we listed it as an information item because staff doesn't have a recommendation, but it's clear in the material that this board can act as it's properly agended.
Can you repeat your motion?
Yeah, well, I didn't actually make a motion,
Okay,
but applications for disability retirement from drop participants shall be treated the same as for other members, irrespective of the drop deadline. A drop participant shall not be denied a disability retirement on the basis that their drop deadline versus their disability rendered retirement necessary.
And what's, Johnny, your position on this motion?
What is my position on the motion? Well, our recommendation was to let us look at it on a case-by-case basis, recognizing that we are not taking the position that if you finish drop, we're just going to say you don't get a disability retirement. We're going to continue to look at the facts of why you had to stop working, why you aren't working anymore.
So are there comments? Go
Yeah. What does our policy say? What does the policy document say about this?
Yeah, sure. We don't have a board policy on this specific issue. I think it's a very small, rare occasion overall in the administration of drop. And so, again, we don't have a written policy on it, but I will tell you that we have our board rules that tell us to look at these cases. And if there is a material dispute in the evidence, and this will often become a material dispute, then we ask it to be sent to hearing right now. So that would be a policy, but
Is there an operational policy, I guess? I mean, on the operational side of the house, is there a policy associated with how these things are looked at?
Not other than what I said.
Okay.
I have a
Johnny,
question.
go ahead.
So, Johnny, do you do this kind of analysis if it wasn't a non-drop person, if it's just ordinary service? And
Yes. Yeah.
so you would potentially tell them, no, you don't get.
Sure. I can give you a story anecdotally. There's a person who service retired, and they chose their service retired because they wanted to stop working and go on vacation and buy an RV. And the question was, well, that's great. You can do that because you're eligible to service retire, but you got to prove that your permanent incapacity rendered your retirement necessary. You have to retire because of your disability. So did you choose to? Because you wanted to go retire and take advantage of that wonderful benefit, or something else? So I think we still look at them very similarly. It's a truism that this person finished drop, they cannot keep working, and that's why they left. And so that's the situation, I think, that I struggle with. The suggestion is that I understand what you're saying in theory, but what do we do when the person could have kept accommodating, or some other situation?
And did the doctor in that particular case, they had the diagnosis and then said, yes, retirement was medically necessary?
That specific case, no. That specific case.
Usually that's like the determining factor. You can't argue with a doc. So my only hesitation is I do expect them to be treated equally. And if they're not, it doesn't matter. Like, I agree with you. Some of the cases, you look at them and it's like, obviously the person has specific reasons for which, he or she is seeking the disability retirement. And I would agree, like, drop ended. That's why you ended your service, because you had to, not because you're disabled. But if the law says what the law says, and you're not supposed to have the discretion to do that analysis. So are we doing something that goes beyond, even though it may be correct, legally, it's not an analysis that's supposed to be taking place. That's where I'm kind of in between. I don't know if I 100% agree with Chris's position, but I know I don't disagree completely. So I'm having a hard time on, if with Chris's motion, I may vote yes, just because the last situation we had that woman is left with tens of thousands of dollars in legal bills, and she won. And so how many times does this happen? Are we better with a bright line rule? It's better for everybody. Maybe some couple here and there are going to game the system, but technically they're legally correct. They have the doctor diagnose them. Whether or not it's really, really why they, that the reason they had to retire was because they had to retire because their drop term ended. I think I could live with that a lot easier than some, every now and then one of these poor people comes in and truly was disabled, and that's really, the fact that they gutted it out for a couple years while the thing was in process, their appeal was in process, and then made it, and then they had to retire because their drop period ended. Well, they shouldn't be punished for that. That's what I struggle with. Anyway.
Johnny, can we go back to the example with George?
Yep.
So my inclination, when you ask for the ability to look at these case by case, is to give you that latitude. I want to give you all the tools you need to be able to do your job well. I just want to make sure that you're viewing these cases the same way I am. So let's use George as an example. Let's say George is a police officer, and actually, to start, let's take drop out of it for a minute. Let's say George is within a few months of retirement, and he suffers a catastrophic injury on the job, loses a leg on a traffic stop, gets a prosthetic, tries to keep working. A couple months in, realizes, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and retire. Retires, keeps working with that prosthetic, and realizes, you know what, I'm going to apply for a disability retirement. He wasn't in drop, he just retired. Now he wants to change it over to a disability retirement. Is that something we would approve?
Thanks for the question. Every case has to be looked at differently, but in again, the board's opinion, one of the wonderful things is this board will grant or deny every benefit, so it's not really what I say. But under that fact scenario, I think it is reasonable that this board could grant that benefit, because what would happen is, most likely, their treating physician would say this person cannot be a police officer with that prosthetic despite trying to work. We would probably send them to an independent medical examiner, which the opinions are often same, as are all doctors. And so in that case, they'd be granted a benefit. we have granted plenty of disability benefits where a member has service retired. Oftentimes, the choice to service retire is because of that disability.
So with that same fact pattern, let's say that officer was in drop, and he's within a few months of separating, drop ending, and that same scenario happens. Would that now change?
I don't
as
think
his
so.
drop ends?
I think if the medical evidence said that this individual could not continue working, and that's the reason why their retirement is rendered necessary, then I think the medical evidence speaks. If we have a doctor who said something differently, said they could have kept working, or there's a chance this person could improve, and then you finish drop, well, then I think that member is in a little more difficult situation because there is a conflict in the evidence, and, well, they can't work anymore because they finished drop.
So if they're trying to make it work, for instance, they're using that prosthetic and hopefully it's getting better, drop expires, 2 months down the road, they're not eligible anymore for that disability.
I don't think, I think that's an incomplete scenario based on what I've just shared. I think it matters less about the individual's desire to keep working and more about the medical evidence and what the doctors say.
I'm just worried in that scenario that it's different than the traditional retirement, switching it over to a disability. In which case, what Chris brought up about them being treated equal, we wouldn't be fulfilling that.
Well,
if I can jump in, I have the same conundrum whether the member is in drop or is not in drop. If you, and this has long been a tension in public pension systems with disability benefit programs. If you're in a, let's ignore drop. If you're a member working, you're being accommodated and you're not permanently stationary, that means we don't know if you're permanently disabled or not, and you service retire, you're not eligible for a disability benefit because one is there was no evidence that you were permanently incapacitated, you know, when you left. And also, if you were still being accommodated and you can do your job. So even if a couple of years later, like the two people that we had or we will have on the agenda when we get to the disability committee, if they came back and they could certainly apply. But then again, as Johnny mentioned, there needs to be medical evidence that they couldn't do their job. So if we use the term walking wounded, and this is really notorious, I shouldn't say notorious because that has a bad connotation. This is very famous in the firefighters, where they will continue working while they're injured. When they shouldn't be working, they should retire. They're actually not capable of doing the job, but somehow they keep doing it. But if they retire, come back, and we look at the medical evidence, then yes, they're granted a disability. And I look at drop the same way, is that you're going through drop. When you come to the end of the drop period, if you're being accommodated and you're not permanently incapacitated and you apply for disability, we're going to say no. But if you come back later and say, you know what, I think I need a disability, we go back and look at that medical evidence like Johnny mentioned. And it really depends on what the doctor says. Could they really do the job, yes or no? But to me, I look at those very similarly, and I really don't feel like we're treating them separately from a procedural perspective. And I really agree with what Chris is saying, is that you really need to treat people the same with regards to the plan. And I feel like we're doing that. And I also need to harmonize what Johnny's saying is, do you put in specific rules that fit all scenarios? And that most times it'll work. What Chris is mentioning, I think that'll work most of the time, but will it work every time? Maybe not. And so that's what I get concerned about. I really appreciate what he's saying because I actually agree in theory with exactly what Chris is saying. Really, really do.
Well, I guess my comment is the motion that's on the floor, is that in conflict with the staff's position? Because you're still going to have to evaluate these cases drop or non-drop on a case-by-case basis. So is this motion in conflict or not? I'm having a trouble with that.
Honestly, I need to stop and think about the motion. It's a bit long.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand exactly what the direction would be. It says that we shall approve application.
No, I mean, Johnny, I think given the fact that there's
Sorry.
this level of confusion, I would prefer that we don't take this motion today, that we take some time at the staff level, maybe back at this committee, and maybe do some work. And I think to Michelle's point, maybe it should be a general policy. Maybe we can have some guardrails around it. But I don't want to quickly move on a decision when there's this level of confusion. So, Chris, can we take some time to maybe work on this a little longer at the committee level before it's brought back to the board? Yeah, that would be a great idea. Ad hoc committee. Can we have an ad hoc committee created? Johnny smiles.
I know, we'll call it the Disability Committee.
Well, can the Disability Committee really come back and build a consensus as opposed to, not that it shouldn't only, it should come from your committee, Chris. I mean, I would like for some consensus around your committee and vet it with staff so that when it comes to the board, we're not left with this level of confusion.
Well, Tom's around for one more meeting of the Disability Committee, so I'm totally okay with it being discussed in more detail at Disability if you are. I just think, in the big picture, I think we probably all want everybody treated equally.
Absolutely.
And so it's a question of, how you accomplish that in the most appropriate way.
Exactly.
So,
That's what I think we want. We need further vetting to achieve that goal.
okay. I'll, my motions really don't move very fast.
Not all the time.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Do you have any further comments, Johnny?
No, thank you. I appreciate your time, everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you, Johnny. So moving on to the Business and Operations Report, which is provided in your packet without a plan presentation. And it's, as you can all see, it was the annual completion of the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, as of June 30th, 2024. And I would note that the ACFR work was done by Macias and Jenny, our auditor, and received an unmodified opinion, which is the highest opinion received. So thank you, staff and the Audit Committee, for completing that work. Are there any questions or comments on the annual ACFR? Do you have any comments, Bobby?
No, it was presented at the Audit Committee and approved by the Audit Committee. We have it on the B&G Committee consent agenda.
Okay. Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, so
on our consent agenda.
Great. So hearing no further comments, we're going to move to Section 6, the Audit Committee. So I'm going to ask our Audit Committee Chair, Bobby Spoon, to provide the committee report.
Okay. We had one action. We met Friday, November 22nd, 2024. We had one action item, and that was to amend and approve the Audit Committee Charter and the Internal Auditor's Charter. It was approved by all Audit Committee members. I think we're going to approve that in the B&G Committee, right? So we don't need it to approve it right now. We had information items presented. We had the, again, excellent ACFR presented by Ted. There were no comments by MGO, the auditors. They provided their report in the materials. So again, thank you, Ted, for all of your work and by the team, your team. The third item was that, where is she? Sarah. Sarah participates in a peer review, and this year, Sarah's work was peer reviewed, and she got a clean opinion. So we participate, the agency participates in a national peer review program for internal auditors, and and Sarah will do peer review of others, but this year it was her turn. So thank you for your good work on that. And Sarah presented a high-level training about the new global internal audit standards, and that's what facilitated the change in the audit committee, in the internal audit charter. We had reports from the internal audit division and from Michelle on IT, and that was it for the audit committee.
That concludes your report?
Concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Bobby, for the committee report. We will now move to Section 7, Disability Committee. So I'd like to ask our Disability Committee Chair, Tom Bagataglia, would you please provide the disability report?
Thank you, Lisa Marie. To begin my report, I'd like to recognize and thank Paul Kaufman for the Disability Committee report out in the November board meeting. Appreciate that, Paul. The Disability Committee met yesterday and unanimously approved all 7 action items on today's disability consent agenda. I'll discuss consent items 1 through 7, and then the board can vote on these as one motion. Are there any action items the board would like to pull for a separate vote? Seeing none. Starting with the consent agenda items 1 through 4, approve the industrial disability retirement applications for Manuel Escalante, Roberto Godinez, Anthony Lieb, and Jerry Ellen Miucho. These 4 applications for industrial disability retirement were approved by the committee, and they are all for the same type of benefit. The following applies to each application. The committee approved these members' applications for industrial disability retirement as each application was supported by evidence of being permanently disabled, being attributed to their work duties, and caused the need for leave in employment. Are there any questions? So each of them were staff's I'll just read each of the 4. Staff recommendation to approve the industrial disability retirement application for Manuel Escalante, Roberto Godinez, Anthony Lieb, and Jerry Ellen Miucho. Are there any questions from the board on these consent agenda items? 1 through 4. So moving on to consent agenda item number 5, staff's recommendation to approve the non-industrial disability retirement application for Christina Wells. The committee approved this application for non-industrial disability retirement as her application was supported by evidence of being permanently disabled, not being attributed to her work duties, and causing the need for leave in employment. Are there any questions from the board before I move to consent agenda item number 6 and 7? All right, so moving on to consent agenda items 6 and 7, approved the request for Arsenio Ortanez and Lee Carter Washington to waive the 2-year deadline and allow them to apply for industrial disability retirement. The committee approved the request by Mr. Ortanez and Mr. Washington to waive the 2-year deadline rule, as staff believe SDCERS will be able to investigate the members' applications. Are there any questions from the board before we move to approve Disability Committee consent items 1 through 7?
Yes, one question, please. Jamar, and I know I asked you this in the Disability Committee, but these were not drop individuals, right, these 2? This is Arsenio, I can't read it, Ortanez. And, yeah, these are not drops?
No, so
Okay.
neither of these members were drop participants. They both service retired on just regular service retirements.
And so 2 years down the line, they say sort of, hey, I have an injury and I believe it's job related. Can I come back? And so we're giving them an extension to do that.
Correct.
To make that case.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so I'll move all consent agenda items, if someone can second that.
There's no
Or
second required.
I guess Bobby will move it. Sorry. There we go.
And with all votes in, Mr. Chair, this motion passes 10-0.
So this finishes the Disability Committee action items. Staff provided a disability status report, and it's available in your package. The disability report provides an overview of the disability application review. Statistics highlighting the caseload is in good shape with caseload of 17 applications, all within the 18-month processing window, which has been delayed due to all except for one has been delayed due to the member's non-related health condition. Are there any questions from the board members or staff? Seeing none, then thank you, and back to Lisa Marie.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom, for the committee report. We'll now move to Section 8, Business and Governance Committee. So can our Business and Governance Committee Chair, Bobby Spoon, would you please provide your committee report?
Thank you, Lisa Marie. We met yesterday. We had one action item, staff's recommendation to amend the Audit Committee Charter, Internal Auditor Charter, process for review of the CEO and the Chief Compliance Officer, process for review of the Internal Auditor, and Division for the Board Rules, the purchase of service credit. Our very capable General Counsel was available to address our questions. We unanimously approve the recommended changes. Are there any questions or comments before I move for approval? Hearing none, I will move. Paul moved to approve.
Sorry.
That's okay.
And with all votes in, Madam Acting Chair, this motion passes 10-0.
Thank you. We had reports from Natasha on Member Services, Benefits Administration Division report, Sandra Clausen, and IT Division from Michelle Wagner-Malecki. And we had one question that was resolved for Johnny on the Legal Division report. And that's it for our oral reports. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Nope. Back to you.
All right, well, thank you, Bobby, for that committee report. We'll now move to Section 9, the Investment Committee. And I'd like to ask our Investment Committee Acting Chair, Michelle Bush, to provide your committee report. And thank you so much for acting on behalf of Cliff.
Thank you. The Investment Committee met yesterday and covered 5 action items on the agenda. The first 4 action items relate to manager selection and are therefore delegated to the Investment Committee. The first action item is approving a $30 million commitment to Berkshire Multifamily Credit Fund for the real estate portfolio. Berkshire Multifamily Credit Fund 4 is a non-core debt fund focused on multifamily investments. Berkshire is an experienced manager and one of the leaders in the Freddie Mac K program, which involves investing in mortgages underwritten by stringent standards and collateralized by high-quality, stable properties. All 3 of the prior funds in this series have had strong performance to date. This item was approved by the Investment Committee with all members present voting yes. No additional vote is needed. Are there any questions or comments from the board on this?
No.
Chris?
Oh, Chris, you have comments?
Okay. Sorry, my question has to do with D and E, so are you there?
No.
No. You're good?
Sorry.
The second item was approving a $50 million commitment to Invesco U.S. Income Fund for the real estate portfolio. We heard a presentation from Makita and Invesco. Invesco U.S. Income Fund is an open-end core plus fund that is diversified across property types with a focus on residential, industrial, and specialty properties. The fund will provide diversification to SDCERS' existing portfolio and stability through its emphasis on income return. The fund has delivered strong performance since inception, significantly outperforming the benchmark over all time periods. This item was approved by the Investment Committee with all members present and voting yes, and no additional vote is needed. Any questions, comments? The third item was approving a $50 million commitment to PRESA 3 fund for the real estate portfolio. We heard a presentation from Makita, our consultant, as well as PGIM. PRESA 3 is a non-core fund with diversified exposure, but a focus on multifamily properties. This investment will help bring the real estate portfolio closer to its targets, as the portfolio is currently underweight both non-core real estate and the multifamily sector. PRESA has had consistent leadership in this fund since its inception in 2003, with a strong track record of performance through cycles. This item was also approved by the investment committee with all members present voting yes. No additional vote is needed. The fourth item was yesterday was to approve a $50 million commitment to the Golub Direct Lending Fund for the private debt portfolio. The investment committee heard a presentation from Aon as well as Golub. Golub Direct Lending is an evergreen fund focusing on originating senior secured loans to private equity-owned U.S. companies in the core middle market. Golub is one of the most experienced investors in the space and focuses on downside protection in the deals they structure. This investment will provide complementary exposure to the existing investments in the private debt portfolio and will continue to build out SDCERS direct lending exposure. This item was approved by the investment committee with all members present voting yes. And it does not require a vote.
And Chris, did you have a question on this item?
No, only on D and E.
Okay.
After the vote.
After the vote.
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Excuse me. The final action item is on the consent agenda and will require a board vote. Would any board member like to discuss this item before I review it and make a motion for the consent agenda approval? The item, every year, the item relates to the approval of staff's recommended changes to the SDCERS proxy voting guidelines. We heard a summary from Demetrios. Every year, staff reviews and updates SDCERS proxy voting guidelines to ensure the guidelines incorporate new governance issues and reflect industry best practices. This year, SDCERS proxy voting vendor Glass Lewis did not recommend any updates to SDCERS guidelines. Staff did add some clarifying language regarding the consideration of artificial intelligence related risk. This item was approved by the investment committee with every member voting yes. Are there any questions from the board on this item before we vote? Then I will go ahead and Brett has made a motion to approve. Quick hands up here. Rosie?
I'm still waiting for one.
Okay.
Thank you. And with all votes in, Madam Acting Chair, this motion passes 10-0.
Thank you. We had two informational items. The first item was total fund performance for the quarter ended September 30th, 2024. Our consultants from Aon presented the report. SDCERS total fund posted a strong absolute return of 4.1% net for third quarter 2024, performing roughly in line with the benchmark return of 4.2%. Outperformance in the fixed income and diversifying portfolios was offset by underperformance in the non-U.S. equity, global equity, and private equity portfolios. The total fund has performed well over long periods of time with a risk-adjusted return in the top quartile over the past 10 years. Are there any questions?
Yes, Karina,
comments?
I have a question. On the, we have benchmarks for our return on investment or for each of these categories, right? And so each year those are reported out. Do you have some sort of a long-term report on how we've done, so over the past 5 years and past 10 years as compared to our benchmarks?
Yes, indeed. So if you look at the performance report, you can actually see the returns over the rolling 5 and 10-year periods, I believe. We'll find the page here. But if you look to Aon's report, page 5, you can see that over the 5 years versus the benchmark, we fell short about 60 basis points. And I think over the 10 years you referred to, just short of the benchmark return of 0.1% or 10 basis points. So roughly in line over the 10 years and slightly lagging about 60 basis points over the 5 years. So that's versus the benchmark
Okay,
return.
thanks. So it's basically, it's in Aon's report on page 5. I'll go back and look at it. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the report.
Our last informational item was related to the annual analysis of SDCERS public market fees. We heard a presentation from Dimitrios. SDCERS investment consultant Aon presented an analysis of the fees SDCERS pays to its public market investment managers compared to the broader manager fee universe. The analysis found that SDCERS pays approximately 21 basis points in fees to its public market managers, which is below the universe median of 24 basis points. This puts SDCERS just outside of the first quartile for fees paid compared to a similar portfolio of publicly traded assets. Did anyone have any questions or comments? Go ahead.
Just for my own education, on the executive summary for this one, it says the universe information is sourced from eVestment Alliance and filtered for similar size, strategy, and vehicle. What does that mean? Is that like particularly a company that will provide and put these things together? Is it audited or?
Thank you for the question. So eVestment is a tool that we use. It houses performance statistics from various managers. They are self-reported returns so that you can sort by a universe, for example, international small cap, and a number of managers will pop up, and you can look at how the managers perform relative to each other, how your existing managers perform relative to that universe, for instance. And so what we're looking for here on the report is within our public or more liquid asset classes, we are correcting for or accounting for the size of the mandate. So obviously the more assets a manager has invested, you would expect that you get some benefit of tiering, so it accounts for do you have a larger or smaller mandate. And it also accounts for how much risk is really in that specific area. So for example, you're going to expect higher fees, I mentioned international small cap, than for example, large cap US or even large cap international. So it accounts for the risk within the mandate, and it also accounts for the mandate size.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
My question had to do with performance fees, and maybe Demetrius or Karina, either one. When I was reading through this, I noticed, if I read this correctly, that in underperforming years, there are still quote-unquote performance fees in some of these cases. Did I read that correctly?
So we do often have performance fees for our private managers. So that's actually very typical of these types of fee structures. On the public side, that is less typical to have like a high watermark. You're typically just paying a certain amount, percentage point based on the assets under management for that strategy.
Yeah, so my question is, though, if they underperform, we still give them a performance fee?
It depends on the terms of the contract. So it's, I will actually defer to Jamie on this one as it relates to private markets and the fees and incentive fees that are charged, but it is really case by case. So if you have like a high water mark, the manager essentially has to hit that return before it can start charging those incentive fees.
And yes, Karina is absolutely correct. It goes on a investment by investment basis, and it's usually based on IRR as opposed to time-weighted returns.
IRR.
Internal rate of return, excuse me.
Thank you.
Sorry. So it's looking at that internal rate of return calculation for the fund versus the set objective for that fund to calculate the performance fee. So while they might have a down year, if they still are above that hurdle, they could be earning that performance fee.
So it's based on a longer-term performance,
Correct.
right? So if over the longer term, they're not hitting the mark, do they still get paid the performance fee?
No, and in some cases, there's a clawback. So if they are having great performance in the beginning and then they start to underperform, there could be a clawback.
Thank you.
There were a number of reports in the board materials related to the investments for everyone to read. Did anyone have any questions for any of those reports or comments or anything? The last thing I'll mention is that the ad hoc committee has worked with staff to finalize the scope of work for the request for proposal for a private market consultant, and that RFP is expected to be issued shortly.
And then there'll be a blackout period.
And we are in a blackout period. Thank you.
All right.
That concludes my report.
All right. Well, thank you, Michelle, for the committee report and serving as the acting chair for the investment committee for January. We'll now move on to section 10 for questions and comments. Do we have any questions or comments or educational session reports from the board?
I have a quick one.
Sure.
So we get lots of training opportunities on this board. Some of them good, some of them not so good. And I just wanted to highlight one that Chris and I just finished recently. SDCERS puts on a accredited fiduciary program. It consists of 2 separate weekends of training and then about an hour or 2 online, taking the exam after. Overall, very good program. I recommend it if you get a chance to go to SDCERS for any of their training. Try and get there the 2 days early to attend that fiduciary training. It was worthwhile. And I have a copy of some of the training materials for the first half of it if anybody's interested.
Did you take the test?
I'm sorry?
Did you take the test?
I did.
Okay.
I passed. So did Chris.
Well, congratulations.
And Bobby's done this too, right? So just so you know, you have 3 accredited fiduciaries here on the board.
Well, congratulations.
We didn't go to Stanford like Louis.
I got 5 because myself and Louis went to Stanford.
Okay. Mm-mm. So we can take a look at your handout? Okay. I'd like to take a look at it. That'd be great. Okay. So, Greg, do you have any comments?
Well, yes, I do. Well, actually, I wanted to mirror Lou's comments, and I wanted to begin my comments and recognize Lou Maggi and Chris Brewster for successfully completing the board certification program, accredited fiduciary course presented by the National Council of Public Employee Retirement Systems, commonly known as SDCERS. Its course is 4 modules held over 4 days covering governance, finance, risk management, human capital with a context to public pension plans. And for successfully passing the comprehensive online exam, they receive validation of learning, an official certificate recognizing your achievement, along with a distinguished lapel pin to wear with pride. That's right off their website.
You guys have your pen?
Not yet.
I'm still waiting on my pin.
Next time, next meeting.
I also wanted to recognize Paul Kaufman for completing the board certification program Directors Consortium presented by the Stanford Graduate School of Business. This course is 25 sessions over 5 days, covering a diverse board governance topics, which included this time around a renowned expert on artificial intelligence. I'd also like to re-recognize Lisa Marie Harris for completing the board certification program Directorship Certification presented by the National Association of Corporate Directors, commonly referred to as the NACD. The self-study course provides a rigorous governance content, comprehensive preparation, and a credentialing exam.
Very hard exam. I don't know if they give us a pen.
Was it really a hard exam? Was it really a heart exam?
Oh, absolutely. You have to go behind a closed door. You got to show them your ID. They monitor you if you go to the bathroom.
Whoa.
They want to make sure you do not cheat. And it takes 3 hours.
Oh, my.
And I know it was important because she put it on her business card, so I see you on LinkedIn. I'd also like to re-recognize Louis Nguyen for completing the NACD directorship and the Stanford's Director Consortium for certification programs. And Bobby, I'd like to re-recognize you for completing your board certification program. These substantive educational programs build strong board governance skills and provide evidence of the professionalism of this board. So going around the dais here, thank you, Louis, Lisa Marie, Bobby, Paul, and Chris. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you all as well. Thank you for your commitment to.
Oh,
thank
I'm
you
not
all.
done.
I just want to say thank them for commitment for education, because it's important to have lifelong learning.
All right, sorry.
Go ahead.
Too much coffee this morning. All right. Our SDCERS board election is underway for the 2 active member seats and the 1 fire safety seat. We have 3 candidates for the 2 active seats, 2 candidates for the fire safety seat, so the election is on. A voting package should be arriving to the active and fire member mailboxes, with members having until January 30th to cast their vote. And in accordance with board policy, the certified election results from the firm conducting the election services company, will be provided to the board at the March 25th meeting for recertification. We are busy preparing for our February 2025 board retreat at the University Club downtown. We begin the evening of Wednesday, February 12th with a networking event, which includes networking, dinner, and a conversation with the Voice of San Diego's editor-in-chief, Scott Lewis. The following day, Thursday, February 13th, we'll have a full day together, beginning with benefit corrections topic, focusing on our efforts first to avoid corrections, then the legal boundaries of correcting those problems, and the governance options available for the SDCERS board. Our fiduciary counsel with Nossaman will be attending the meeting to help assist defining the legal boundaries and addressing questions regarding to the board's fiduciary duty and considering a corrections policy. Calendar invite, directions, and agenda and meeting materials will be forthcoming. The city, with assistance from SDCERS staff and retiree organizations, namely the Retired Employee Association, REA, and the Retired Fire and Police Association, RFPA, have successfully launched benefit outsourcing solutions, known as BOSS, as the city's new retiree healthcare plan administrator. BOSS administered the recent retiree healthcare open enrollment period and is now handling the city insurance carrier enrollment and premiums. SDCERS will now serve as a deduction agency to withhold premiums from retirees and beneficiary pension payment and forward amounts to the city for their distribution to their administrator. The December 2024 retiree payroll was the final month where SDCERS provided retiree healthcare reimbursement services before BOSS assumes this role for the January 2025 reimbursement requests. A real special note of appreciation to our Benefits Administration Division Director, Sandra Clausen. I cannot express enough how much I appreciate you. And also to our Information Technology Director, Michelle Wegner-Malecki, and their teams for the significant amount of time they put into this process to make sure that BOSS was off on the correct foot during this transition. Because as Sandra mentions regularly, we really wanted to make sure that our members were well served and better served than what we were doing for them with regards to healthcare administration. I would like to recognize and thank Johnny Tran for teaming up with Rebecca Walker to teach a course on compliance at the Calipers Advanced Staff Training. Thank you, Johnny. And I'd also like to recognize the 2024 SDCERS Chili Cook-Off winners. Runner-up, Sarah Dixon's in the house. Congratulations, Sarah. And taking first place, the top podium finish, Johnny Tran.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There is still a controversy on who actually cooked the chili, but we'll leave that be. In closing, I'd like to share a nice holiday card received from a grateful retiree. It says, "May all your holiday season be merry and bright. Greg, wishing you and the SDCERS board and staff all the best. Thank you for all the hard work this year. One very grateful retiree, Karen Porteous." And Karen was the Executive Vice President, Chief of Staff at the Port.
Okay,
So it was
very
very,
nice.
very nice to hear from Karen. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Okay, great. So we're going to move on to Section 11, closed session. Johnny, do we have any closed session matters?
We do have closed session as listed in the agenda today.
Okay, so I'd like to announce that the board will go into closed session. For the staff, consultants, and visitors not invited to participate in the closed session, would you please leave the room? And Rosie, please stop recording the meeting while we're in closed session. And during closed session, feel free to help yourself to lunch.
Hey, Greg, I don't remember a board vote on that chili competition.
Well, you can go. But he's just gonna.
The news publishers.
So Rosie, can you please begin recording again?
Yes, Madam President, we are ready to proceed whenever you are.
Okay. I think we're ready, right, Johnny?
Hi, we've come out of closed session and we have nothing to report out of closed session.
All right. Well, thank you, Johnny. And so now we'll move to section 13 with adjournment. So this meeting is adjourned. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.